Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into a world that's both intimately familiar and utterly alien. Imagine this. You're snuggled deep under your blankets, the house is quiet, maybe you can hear the soft hum of your fridge, or the gentle whir of a fan, lulling you into that perfect pre-sleep state. Now, picture yourself without any of that. No fridge, no fan, no quiet house warmed by central heating. Instead, you're in a drafty hovel, the smell of damp earth and wood smoke clinging to the air, and the only sounds are the rustle of straw as your family shifts in their sleep, and perhaps the distant howl of a wolf. You might think you're pretty tough, you've faced a few challenges, right? Maybe a long queue at the DMV or a particularly frustrating Wi-Fi outage. But tonight, we're stepping back, way back, to a time when simply making it through another day was a victory. You're about to experience the life of a medieval peasant. And let me tell you, you probably won't survive this. Not because you're weak, but because the deck was so stacked against you, it's honestly a miracle anyone made it through. We're talking about a world where the smallest cough could turn fatal, where a bad harvest meant starvation, and where your very existence was tied to the whims of a powerful, often distant, lord. It's a harsh reality, stripped bare of all our modern comforts and conveniences. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening in, let me know where you are and what time it is for you in the comments. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, not to the familiar glow of a smartphone or the soft light filtering through curtains, but to the murky, barely there dawn seeping through a small, unglazed opening in your wattle and daub hut. The air is cold, damp, and carries the distinct aroma of wood smoke and unwashed bodies. You stretch, a deep ache in your bones from sleeping on a straw pallet laid directly on the earth floor. This isn't a bad dream. This is your life. And it's not just your life, it's the life of literally 90% of the population in medieval Europe. You are a peasant, a serf, tied to the land, a living part of the feudal system that defines every single aspect of your existence. There's no escaping this. No job hopping, no moving to a new city for a fresh start. Your ancestors tilled this land, your parents tilled it, and unless something truly catastrophic happens, you and your children will do the same. This isn't just about farming. It's about a social order so rigid, it makes a concrete wall look flexible. You are born into a world where your social standing is determined by birth, not by ambition or talent. You might be a villain, a serf, or perhaps a cotter, but the distinctions are largely academic when your daily reality involves relentless toil and constant subservience. The lord of the manor owns the land, and in many ways, he owns you too. You can't leave without his permission, you can't marry without his approval, and probably a fee. And your every move is subject to his authority. It's like being born into a giant, inescapable corporate structure, except the CEO is also your judge, jury, and sometimes executioner. Your village is a cluster of these humble huts, perhaps a dozen or so, huddled around a modest church and, a little further off, the more substantial residence of the Lord, be it a fortified manor house or, if you're lucky, a full-blown castle. This village is your entire world. You might occasionally venture to a nearby market town, but anything beyond a day's walk is largely unknown, shrouded in rumor and local legend. The roads are terrible, often unsafe, and the thought of traveling further than you absolutely have to is simply absurd. Why would you? Everything you need and everything you are is right here. This life, this unyielding cycle, begins before the sun truly breaches the horizon. Your stomach rumbles, a familiar companion, but there's no leisurely breakfast to be had. A piece of stale bread, perhaps some weak ale, and then it's out into the fields. Your day, every day, is dictated by the rhythm of the seasons and the demands of the land. You are a human tractor, a living plow, your muscles aching, your hands calloused, your back perpetually protesting. The tools are rudimentary. Wooden plows, often tipped with iron, scythes, hoes. It's not efficient by any modern standard, but it's what you have, and it requires immense physical strength and endurance. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly owned, anything beyond the clothes on their backs and a few household items. While you might possess a small plot of land for your personal use, even that is often held in exchange for labor on the Lord's domain, his direct land. This system, where you give your time and effort to the Lord in exchange for protection and the right to work a smaller portion of land for yourself, is the bedrock of feudalism. It's a protection racket, essentially. The Lord offers military defense against raiders or rival lords, and in return, you provide the labor and a portion of your harvest. It's a bit like a medieval protection plan, only you pay with sweat and grain instead of monthly premiums. And unlike your car insurance, you can't exactly shop around for a better deal. The idea of free time is almost laughable. Your life is work, punctuated by sleep and a few essential, hurried meals. Even your days off, the holy days, often involve church attendance and perhaps some communal celebration. But the shadow of the next day's labor is always looming. You work in communal fields, the strips of land often allocated and reallocated each year, ensuring everyone shares in both good and bad soil. This open field system fosters a strong sense of community, a shared burden, but also reinforces the collective nature of your existence. There's no room for individualism here. Your survival depends on everyone pulling their weight. Imagine a group project where your literal life depends on your teammates showing up. That's your daily reality. The Lord's domain, the land he directly controls, is often the most fertile and well-tended. You spend a significant portion of your week working these fields, 2 or 3 days, sometimes more, especially during planting and harvest seasons. This labor, known as corvée labor, is obligatory. You don't get paid for it, not in coin anyway. Your payment is the continued right to live and work on the land, and the Lord's protection. This division of labor is stark. The Lord, his knights, and the clergy are the praying and fighting classes, while you are the working class, the bedrock upon which their entire society rests. It's a very neat, very hierarchical structure, like a meticulously built pyramid, and you're right at the very bottom, holding everyone else up. Beyond the fields, your obligations to the Lord are numerous. You owe him a portion of your harvest, known as a tithe, though technically the church also claims a tithe, making it a double whammy, and often other payments in kind: chickens, eggs, perhaps even a young pig. You must use his mill to grind your grain, his oven to bake your bread, and his winepress to make your wine, paying a fee for each use. These banalities are a clever way for the Lord to extract further wealth from your meager existence. It's like a medieval subscription service, but you can't unsubscribe. The average peasant hut is a single room, shared with your entire family, and often your livestock as well. A central hearth provides warmth and a place for cooking, the smoke finding its way out through a hole in the roof, or simply permeating everything. The floor is packed earth. The walls are wattle and daub, woven branches plastered with mud and dung. The roof is thatched. The simple, functional, and frankly a bit grubby by modern standards. There's little privacy and absolutely no luxury. Your most prized possessions might be a few wooden bowls, a pot, and the clothes on your back. You sleep on straw, rising with the sun and going to bed not long after it sets, your internal clock perfectly synchronized with the natural world. No alarm clocks needed when the chickens or your rumbling stomach do the job. Despite the relentless toil and severe constraints, life isn't entirely without its moments of communal joy. There are feast days, often tied to religious festivals, where the village gathers for a rare communal meal, perhaps some ale, and a bit of dancing or storytelling. These are fleeting moments of respite, chances to briefly forget the grind, to connect with your neighbors, and to reinforce the bonds of community that are so essential for survival. It's during these times you might hear old ballads, or gossip about the Lord, or tales of the outside world, filtered through countless tellings. The children, once they are old enough to walk steadily, are quickly put to work. There's no concept of childhood as we know it today. From a young age, they're helping with chores, tending animals, gathering firewood, and eventually joining you in the fields. Education is a luxury reserved for the clergy and the nobility. Your classroom is the muddy field, your lessons learned through observation and painful experience. You learn to read the signs of the weather, the subtle cues of the earth, the habits of animals. These are the crucial literacies of your world, far more vital than any book learning. The seasons dictate everything. Spring is a frenzy of plowing and planting, hope mingled with anxiety about the coming harvest. Summer is long days of weeding and tending. Autumn is the intense rush of harvest, a collective effort to bring in the crops before the weather turns, a period of immense relief mixed with exhaustion. And then winter, the leanest time, when supplies dwindle and the cold bites deep. It's a cycle of boom and bust, of frantic activity and grim endurance. Your survival hinges on the benevolence of nature and the sheer grit of your own two hands. The sun, a pale, reluctant disk in the early morning sky, casts long shadows as you trudge towards the communal fields. The ground beneath your worn, perhaps even bare, feet is cold and hard. Your breath plumes in the crisp air, a fleeting testament to your presence in a world that largely ignores your individual identity. You are part of the vast, anonymous workforce, the backbone of a system that defines your every waking moment. This isn't just a job. It's your existence, woven into the very fabric of medieval society. Feudalism isn't just a fancy word from a history book. It's the invisible chains that bind you. At its core, it's a decentralized system of land tenure and loyalty. Imagine a giant, intricate web with the king at the very top, theoretically, then powerful nobles, dukes, counts, then lesser nobles, barons, knights, and finally, at the very bottom, you. Each layer owes loyalty and service to the layer above, typically in exchange for land or protection. But for you, the peasant, it's a one-way street of obligation. You owe labor, loyalty, and a hefty chunk of your harvest to your local lord, and in return, he theoretically offers you protection from invaders, keeps the peace, and allows you to farm a small plot of land for your own sustenance. It sounds like a raw deal, right? And often it was. Your lord, the man who holds ultimate sway over your life, is not necessarily a benevolent figure. He might be, but more often he's a pragmatic landowner primarily concerned with maintaining his wealth and power. He lives in a manor house, often fortified, a constant reminder of his elevated status. His days are filled with managing his estates, dispensing justice or what passes for it, hunting and perhaps training for combat. Your interaction with him is usually limited to formal occasions, paying your dues, seeking permission for marriage, or appearing before his manor court for some transgression. It's a relationship of immense power imbalance, where his word is law, and your grievances often fall on deaf ears. You don't have a lawyer, a union, or even a suggestion box. The laws that govern your life are not written down in easily accessible pamphlets. They are customary laws, passed down through generations, enforced by the Lord's bailiff and the manor court. This court, presided over by the Lord or his steward, handles everything from petty disputes over livestock to more serious crimes. As a peasant, you have few rights within this system. You can't appeal to a higher authority easily, and justice is often swift and harsh. Imagine a reality TV show, but instead of getting voted off, you might get flogged or have your meager possessions confiscated. It's a sobering thought. This lack of legal recourse meant that exploitation was rampant. The Lord could demand extra labor services during peak seasons, levy arbitrary fines for minor infractions, or increase rents and taxes at his whim. Your only real power lay in collective, passive resistance, working slowly, feigning illness, or in extreme cases, fleeing, though this was incredibly risky and rare, as you'd become an outlaw. Historians still argue whether the relationship between lord and peasant was primarily one of mutual obligation or outright exploitation. It likely varied wildly from manor to manor, but for you, living it, the scales often felt heavily tipped in the Lord's favor. Your obligations extend beyond just labor. The taya, for instance, was an annual tax levied by the Lord, often a fixed sum per household. Then there were harriots, a payment made to the Lord upon the death of a tenant, usually in the form of the best beast owned by the deceased. Imagine your elderly father passes away, and the Lord's bailiff immediately comes to claim your family's prized cow. It's a gut punch, a stark reminder that even in death, you are not free from the Lord's demands. And remember those banalities we talked about? The forced use of the Lord's mill, oven, and winepress, all for a fee. It's like having to pay your landlord extra to use their kitchen appliances. You can see how these constant drains on your already meager resources made life incredibly precarious. The land itself is often divided into 3 large fields, rotated annually between different crops, like wheat, barley, or rye, and fallow, left unplanted to recover nutrients. This 3-field system was an improvement over earlier 2-field methods, allowing for more efficient land use and reducing the risk of total crop failure. However, it also reinforced the communal nature of your farming. Everyone worked their assigned strips within these large fields, and decisions about what to plant and when were made collectively, or more accurately, dictated by tradition and the Lord's overseer. There was little room for individual innovation or entrepreneurial spirit. Your primary goal, day in and day out, is simple: survival. Everything you do, every backbreaking task, every penny, if you ever saw one, you saved, was geared towards putting food in your stomach and keeping a roof over your head. Luxury is an alien concept. Comfort is a fleeting dream. Your world is one of constant effort, a relentless struggle against the elements, disease, and the demands of your overlord. You were simple, rough-spun wool or linen clothing, mended countless times, until it's more patched than original fabric. Shoes are a luxury. Many go barefoot or wear crude wooden clogs. Your personal hygiene is, well, basic. Baths are rare, soap is virtually non-existent, and the idea of separate latrines for every household is simply laughable. You share your living space with animals, and the general smell of the village is, shall we say, earthy. A quirky tidbit: did you know that in some medieval villages, there was a designated common oven that everyone had to use, not just for bread, but often for communal bathing on certain days? Imagine sharing your bathwater with the entire village. It really puts into perspective how different their concept of privacy and hygiene was. And sometimes the Lord would have a gallows field, a piece of land clearly visible from the village where executed criminals were left hanging as a stark warning. Talk about a grim roadside attraction. Despite the hardships, there's a strong sense of community. You live and work alongside the same families for generations. Your neighbors are your extended family, your support network. When someone is ill, others help with their tasks. When a child is born, the village celebrates. When someone dies, the village mourns. This collective spirit is vital, a buffer against the harsh realities of life. It's not a choice, it's a necessity. You literally depend on each other for survival. If your neighbor's crop fails, it impacts the overall food supply of the village, and potentially your own. This interdependence fosters a strong, if sometimes stifling, social cohesion. Your life is also profoundly shaped by the church. The local priest, often himself from peasant stock, is a central figure in your community. He baptizes your children, marries you, offers solace in times of sorrow, and performs the last rites. The church building is often the most impressive structure in the village, a place of sanctuary and spiritual guidance. You attend Mass regularly, participate in religious festivals, and contribute your tithes, 1/10 of your produce, to the church. For many, faith provides comfort, hope for an afterlife that promises respite from earthly toil, and a framework for understanding a world that is often bewildering and terrifying. It's a powerful force, both spiritually and socially, providing a common moral compass and a sense of shared destiny. You learn early on that complaining too loudly, or challenging the established order, is a dangerous game. The Lord's authority is backed by physical force, his armed retainers, his bailiff, and ultimately, the power of the king. Disobedience can lead to harsh punishments: fines, flogging, or even expulsion from the manor, which is essentially a death sentence in a world where land is life. The system, for all its inequities, is incredibly stable precisely because it's built on generations of custom, fear, and the sheer impossibility of escape for the vast majority of its participants. You are a cog in a massive machine, and your function is to turn until you can turn no more. This quiet acceptance, born of necessity, is a hallmark of your daily struggle. The first rays of sunlight, still cool and weak, are your alarm clock. There's no snooze button, no gentle chime to ease you into the day. Instead, it's the insistent bleating of a goat, the lowing of a cow, or perhaps the sharp bark of a village dog that pulls you from the fitful sleep of a straw pallet. You roll over, the rough woolen blanket doing little to stave off the persistent chill that seems to cling to your bones even in summer. The air inside your small, single-roomed hut is thick with the scent of wood smoke from the banked embers of last night's fire, mixed with the ever-present odors of damp earth, stale straw, and the close proximity of bodies, both human and animal. Your family stirs around you, your wife, already reaching for the simple clay pot to begin heating water for a meager breakfast. Your children, still half asleep, but soon to be roused for their own chores. There's no time for lingering, no space for quiet contemplation. Life in the medieval village is a relentless march, dictated by the sun, the seasons, and the insatiable demands of the land. Breakfast is a swift, unceremonious affair. A hunk of dark, dense bread, often made from rye or barley, baked in the Lord's oven, and for which you paid a fee, naturally. Perhaps a thin gruel, a watery porridge made from oats or peas. If you're lucky, and it's a good season, there might be a few dried berries or a sliver of cheese. Meat is a rare luxury, reserved for feast days or after a successful hunt, and even then, poaching on the Lord's land is a risky business. Water, drawn from the village well, is your primary beverage, though weak. Small beer or ale is common, even for children, as a safer alternative to potentially contaminated water. You eat quickly, chewing slowly to make what little food you have last, your stomach already anticipating the long hours of work ahead. As the sun climbs higher, you step out of your hut. The village is already a hive of activity. Smoke curls from other chimneys. Figures move purposefully between huts and animal pens. The distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the murmur of voices, the incessant cackling of chickens. These are the sounds of your world coming to life. You might pause for a moment, a brief stretch, feeling the stiffness in your back and shoulders. Every morning, it's the same. Your body is a tool and it's already worn. Your first task of the day after a hurried bite is almost always to the fields. Whether it's plowing, sowing, weeding, or harvesting, the land is your master. You pick up your hoe, or perhaps join your neighbors at the communal plow, drawn by oxen that belong to the Lord or are communally owned. The work is physically brutal, repetitive, and unceasing. You bend, you lift, you pull, you push, under the watchful eye of the Lord's bailiff or overseer. Your hands are perpetually calloused, your nails broken, dirt permanently etched under them. Your back aches, your muscles burn, and sweat streaks your face even on cooler days. There are no machines to lighten the load, no ergonomic tools, no breaks for a quick coffee. Just you, the earth, and the raw power of your own body. During plowing season, you'd spend hours guiding the plow, ensuring the furrows were straight and deep enough. It's a slow, arduous process. You learn to read the soil, to understand its moods, to recognize the subtle signs that indicate when it's ready for planting. You feel the rhythms of the earth in your very bones. Then comes sowing, scattering seeds by hand, hoping for good germination, praying for enough rain but not too much, for warmth but not scorching heat. Each seed represents a hope for survival, a fragile promise of future sustenance. Weeding is endless. The stubborn green shoots seem to appear overnight, competing with your precious crops for nutrients. You spend countless hours on your knees, meticulously pulling up weeds by hand, your fingers stained green, your back protesting with every movement. It's mind-numbingly repetitive, but absolutely essential. A field choked with weeds means a significantly reduced harvest, and that could mean starvation for your family. There's no escaping the reality that every single weed you miss could be a bite of food you lose. The harvest is the most critical and intense period of the year. It's a race against time, against the unpredictable weather. The entire village mobilizes, men, women, and even older children working from dawn until dusk, sometimes even into the twilight hours by the light of the moon. Scythes flash, bundles of grain are tied, and carted to the threshing floor. The air is thick with dust and chaff, your throat is dry, and your body is pushed to its absolute limits. But there's also a powerful sense of collective effort, of shared purpose. Every sheaf gathered, every kernel threshed, is a victory against the specter of hunger. It's during these times that the village truly functions as one massive, sweating, breathing organism, all focused on the singular goal of survival. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly experienced what we would call leisure time in the modern sense. It's true that during certain parts of the agricultural cycle, like the depths of winter or periods between planting and harvest, the intensity of fieldwork might lessen. But even then, there were always other tasks. Repairing tools, mending clothes, tending animals, gathering firewood, maintaining the hut, processing food for storage. Life was a continuous cycle of necessary labor. The idea of weekends or vacations would be utterly alien to you. Your days off were typically feast days or Sundays, dedicated to church and perhaps some modest celebration. A quirky tidbit. Did you know that medieval peasants often kept their pigs in the village itself, and sometimes even within their huts during winter for warmth? Imagine sharing your living room with a pig. This practice, while practical for warmth and security, certainly contributed to the overall lack of hygiene and the spread of disease. It wasn't exactly a fragrant arrangement, but when warmth meant survival, you made do. Your work isn't just limited to the fields. Women, in particular, have an equally relentless round of tasks. They're responsible for preparing meals, grinding grain, often by hand if the Lord's mill is too far or too expensive, fetching water, making and mending clothes, raising children, tending to the small garden plot around the hut, and caring for the few domestic animals like chickens or a goat. They might also help in the fields during peak seasons. It's a dual burden of domestic labor and agricultural work, utterly exhausting. The concept of gender roles was not a debate. It was a deeply ingrained practical necessity for survival. As evening approaches, the work in the fields finally ceases. You trudge back to your hut, your body screaming in protest, your mind already contemplating the next day's labor. The smell of wood smoke fills the air again, more strongly now, as evening fires are lit. Supper is another simple meal, perhaps more gruel, some more bread, maybe a few root vegetables if they're in season. There's little conversation during the meal. Everyone is too tired. The only light comes from the flickering fire, casting dancing shadows on the mud walls. After supper, there might be a brief period of communal gathering, if energy permits. Perhaps stories are told around a larger fire in the center of the village, or songs are sung. But mostly, the evening is for mending, preparing for the next day, and then, mercifully, sleep. You lie down on your straw pallet, the sounds of your family breathing around you, the faint rustle of animals in the corner. Sleep comes quickly, a deep, exhausted oblivion. And when you wake, you'll do it all again. Sunup to sundown, day after day, year after year. This relentless, unyielding daily grind is the very essence of your medieval peasant life. It's a testament to the sheer physical and mental endurance required simply to exist. As you lift your head from the damp straw pallet, the first sounds you register aren't the chirping of birds or the gentle rustle of leaves, but the familiar symphony of your immediate world. The soft snuffling of the family pig in its corner, the gentle cooing of doves nesting in the eaves, and the low, contented chewing of the cow tethered just outside. Your village isn't just a collection of huts. It's a living, breathing entity, a perfectly tuned, if perpetually struggling, ecosystem. Every person, every animal, every patch of cultivated earth plays a vital, interconnected role in the collective struggle for survival. Think of it like a medieval version of a highly complex organism, where each cell has a specific, non-negotiable function. You are a muscle cell, constantly contracting, tirelessly working. Your neighbors are other muscle cells. The Lord is the brain, issuing commands and taking resources. The church is the nervous system, providing guidance and social cohesion. And the land? That's the digestive system, turning raw materials into sustenance. This village, your entire known world, functions as a remarkably self-sufficient unit, largely cut off from the wider, chaotic world beyond its boundaries. Your day begins not just with your family, but with the immediate needs of your livestock. Even the poorest peasant usually possessed a few chickens for eggs and a rare feast, perhaps a goat for milk, and if you were truly fortunate, a pig or even a share in a communal ox or cow. These animals are invaluable. Chickens scratch for insects, fertilizing the ground. Goats provide milk and cheese, a vital source of protein and fat. Pigs are remarkably efficient at converting scraps and forest forage into meat, a precious commodity. And oxen are your heavy machinery, providing the brute force for plowing that no human could match. Caring for them, feeding them, mucking out their pens or your hut, if they're sharing space, is a daily fundamental chore. Lose an animal to disease or theft, and it's not just a financial setback. It's a direct threat to your family's very survival. The layout of your village is typically organic, shaped by centuries of use. At its heart lies the manor house, the Lord's dwelling, and the church. Around these central points, the huts of the peasants are clustered, often without any strict order. Beyond the huts lie the crofts or small garden plots immediately adjacent to each dwelling, where your family cultivates vegetables, herbs, and perhaps some flax for making linen. These private gardens, though small, are crucial for supplementing the communal field crops, providing variety and a small measure of food security. Further out are the vast open fields, divided into numerous narrow strips. Each peasant family holds a scattering of these strips across the different fields. This dispersal of strips, a quirk of the medieval farming system, meant that everyone shared in both the good soil and the bad, and it prevented any one family from being devastated by localized crop failure. It also reinforced the communal nature of farming, as everyone had to work in concert, respecting the fallow cycle and the timing of plowing and planting. You couldn't just decide to plant something different on your strip. You were part of a larger agricultural rhythm. Beyond the cultivated fields lies the common land. This is where the village truly demonstrates its collective spirit. The common is uncultivated land, often woodland, pasture, or heath, that is shared by all peasants for essential resources. You use the common to graze your animals, gather firewood for cooking and warmth, collect wild berries and nuts, and perhaps even hunt small game, though the Lord often reserved hunting rights for himself, so you had to be careful. The common is a lifeline, providing crucial supplementary resources that make your meager existence possible. Without it, life would be even harder. It's a bit like a medieval shared park, only instead of frisbees and picnics, it's for foraging and survival. A quirky tidbit. Did you know that in some medieval villages, if a pig was caught rooting around in someone's cultivated field, the owner of the field was sometimes allowed to cut off the pig's ear as punishment? Imagine the village gossip after that happened. It speaks to the importance of protecting every bit of food and the stark, immediate consequences for infractions within the village ecosystem. Within this tight-knit community, craftsmen are rare but vital. There might be a village blacksmith, essential for making and repairing tools like plowshares and scythes. A miller operates the Lord's mill, grinding everyone's grain. Perhaps a carpenter or a weaver if the village is large enough. These individuals, while still peasants, possess specialized skills that make them indispensable. You might trade a portion of your grain for a sharpened plowshare, or some eggs for a mended bucket. Money is scarce, so much of the economy within the village runs on barter, a direct exchange of goods and services. The church, as we've touched on, is more than just a place of worship. It's the social hub of the village, a focal point for community gatherings, announcements, and celebrations. The priest, often from a peasant family himself, serves as a moral guide, educator for what little education exists, and sometimes even a mediator in disputes. Religious festivals, saints' days, and Sunday Mass provide breaks from the relentless labor, offering opportunities for communal feasting, storytelling, and a sense of shared identity. For many, the church bell ringing out across the fields is the constant soundtrack of their lives, marking the hours and the rhythm of the day. This communal living fosters a strong sense of interdependence. You depend on your neighbor's ox to help plow your field, just as they might depend on your wife's skill at midwifery. If a family falls ill, the community steps in to help with their crops and animals. There's no social safety net in the modern sense. The community is the safety net. This means that reputation and social cohesion are incredibly important. Gossip, neighborly disputes, and feuds can be profoundly disruptive, threatening the delicate balance of the village. Everyone knows everyone else's business, which can be both a comfort and a curse. However, this tight-knit community also means a lack of privacy and little room for individuality. Deviate too much from the norm, express unusual opinions, or refuse to pull your weight, and you'll face social ostracism, which in this context can be a sentence of hardship. Your identity is largely subsumed into that of the family and the village. There's no scope for personal ambition beyond ensuring your family's survival and perhaps leaving a small inheritance of tools or a few animals to your children. The world beyond your village is largely irrelevant, a hazy concept of distant towns and powerful lords you will likely never meet. The boundaries of your village, both physical and conceptual, are incredibly strong. Travel is difficult and dangerous. Stories of bandits, wild animals, and hostile strangers are common. The sheer effort required to move from one place to another, coupled with the dangers, means that most peasants live their entire lives within a few miles of their birthplace. This creates a remarkably insular world, where local customs, dialects, and traditions are deeply entrenched. The outside world is simply not your concern. Your focus is entirely on the small patch of earth that sustains you and your community. Historians still argue whether the medieval village was a truly egalitarian society within its peasant class or if subtle hierarchies and power dynamics still existed. While everyone shared the same fundamental hardships, some families might have had slightly more land, more animals, or a greater reputation, leading to a nuanced social order even amongst the lowest class. Regardless, the overriding principle was collective survival, a shared struggle against the relentless forces of nature and the demands of the Lord. Your village, for all its limitations, is your fortress against an unpredictable and often brutal world. The ache in your stomach is a constant, dull companion, a low thrumming that never truly fades. It sharpens to a gnawing emptiness during the long, lean months, particularly in winter and early spring, before the new crops are ready. This isn't just hunger. This is famine's gnawing hunger, a primal, terrifying force that hangs over your medieval peasant life like a perpetual storm cloud. Every single harvest is not just a seasonal event. It's a desperate gamble, a high-stakes bet against nature, where the chips are your family's very lives. You've heard the stories passed down from your grandparents of the truly bad years, the years when the rains failed, or when they came too much, turning fields into muddy bogs. The years when pests descended like a biblical plague, devouring everything in their path. Or the years when warfare swept through the land, soldiers pillaging what little food was stored, leaving nothing but scorched earth and despair. These aren't just cautionary tales. They're very real, very present threats. You live with the knowledge that one sustained period of bad weather, one blight, one significant disruption, could plunge your entire village into a nightmare of starvation. Your diet, even in good times, is incredibly monotonous and calorically insufficient by modern standards. It's built almost entirely on cereals, rye, barley, oats, and perhaps some wheat if you're lucky enough to live on fertile land. This grain is ground into flour and baked into the dark, heavy bread that forms the absolute staple of your diet. You consume it for breakfast, for lunch in the fields, and for supper. Day in, day out, it's bread. Supplementing this are pulses like peas and beans, which provide some much-needed protein and can be stored. Root vegetables are onions, carrots, parsnips, though not the vibrant orange carrots we know today, but pale, wilder varieties, are grown in your small garden plot. Meat is a rare luxury. You might get some from the occasional communal hunt on common land, if the Lord allows, or if a pig is slaughtered for a special occasion. Your chickens provide eggs, but they're too valuable as layers to be regularly eaten. Fish might be available if you live near a river or coast, but often fishing rights were also controlled by the Lord. Dairy, primarily in the form of cheese and butter made from goat or cow milk, provides vital fats, but cows produce far less milk than modern breeds, and keeping them fed through winter is a challenge. Fruits are seasonal and perishable: wild berries, apples, pears, eaten fresh when available, or crudely dried for later. Your ability to survive hinges entirely on the harvest. The period from late summer into autumn, when the crops are ripe, is a frenzy of activity. Every able body is in the fields, working from dawn till dusk. The success of this period determines whether your family will eat or merely survive for the next year. You watch the skies anxiously, pray for good weather, and work until your muscles scream, knowing that every sheaf of grain brought in is a buffer against the specter of hunger. The threshing, the winnowing, the laborious process of separating the grain from the chaff, it's all part of this desperate, crucial effort. Once harvested, the grain must be stored. This is a critical challenge. You don't have airtight containers or climate-controlled silos. Grain is typically stored in communal granaries or in crude bins within your hut, vulnerable to damp, rodents, and insects. A significant portion of the harvest can be lost to spoilage, further reducing your already meager reserves. Imagine working your fingers to the bone for months, only for half your efforts to be eaten by rats. It's soul-crushing. The period of greatest anxiety is often late winter and early spring, known as the lean months. By this time, last year's harvest is dwindling, new crops aren't yet ready, and stores are running dangerously low. This is when the ache in your stomach becomes a constant companion, when every morsel is stretched, and when the signs of malnutrition start to appear. Dull eyes, brittle hair, a pervasive weakness in your limbs. Children and the elderly are particularly vulnerable during this time. When the harvest fails, truly fails, that's when famine sets in. And it's not a quick process. It's a slow, agonizing descent into desperation. First, you ration your existing food, making every crumb count. Then, you start eating things you wouldn't normally touch. Wild roots, bark, whatever forage you can find in the woods, hoping it's not poisonous. Your animals, if you have any, become the next sacrifice. You might slaughter your prized goat or pig, a devastating decision that offers a few days of sustenance but removes a vital long-term asset. The village animals, normally too valuable to eat, become fair game. People grow weak, susceptible to disease. Their bodies consume their own muscle and fat. Desperation leads to crime, petty theft of food, raiding other villages, though this is risky and often met with brutal retaliation. The social fabric begins to fray. People leave the village, becoming vagrants, wandering in search of food, often dying on the roadsides. Whole families can be wiped out. The sheer scale of death during major famines, like the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, which affected much of Northern Europe, is almost incomprehensible to us. Millions perished, not from plague, but from the simple, horrifying lack of food. It's a stark reminder that even without disease, medieval life was a knife-edge existence. A quirky tidbit. During severe famines, there are records of medieval people resorting to eating clay or even sawdust to try and fill their stomachs. Imagine the sheer, desperate hunger that would drive a human being to consume such things, knowing they held no nutritional value. It's a chilling thought. The fear of famine, therefore, permeates every aspect of your life. It shapes your daily work, your social interactions, even your prayers. You offer thanks for every successful harvest, understanding that it's a blessing, a temporary reprieve. You are acutely aware of the fragility of your existence, the thin veil that separates you from starvation. This constant struggle against hunger means that accumulating surplus is a dream for most, a buffer against future calamity. But for the vast majority, every year is about breaking even, about just barely getting by. Historians still argue whether the recurring famines of the medieval period were primarily due to unpredictable weather patterns and primitive agricultural techniques, or if they were exacerbated by the feudal system itself, which extracted so much surplus from the peasants that they had little left to store for lean times. It's likely a combination of both, a brutal synergy that kept the peasant class perpetually on the brink. Your lord, while theoretically responsible for your well-being, often offers little practical help during a famine. His primary concern might be ensuring his own stores are sufficient, or he might view the deaths as unfortunate but unavoidable. He might even continue to demand his dues, exacerbating the crisis for you. While some lords might have offered temporary relief, a widespread famine overwhelmed any individual lord's capacity to help. This highlights the harsh reality. You are largely on your own, reliant on your own labor, your small stores, and the dwindling resources of your community. It's a terrifying thought, a constant reminder of how incredibly vulnerable you are in this brutal, unpredictable world. The persistent ache in your bones isn't just from a day spent toiling in the fields. It's a deeper, more insidious feeling. It's the constant, low-grade thrum of your body fighting off one ailment after another. A quiet battle against the invisible enemies that lurk in the damp earth, the stagnant water, and the very air you breathe. In your medieval world, sickness isn't an anomaly. It's a way of life, a terrifying lottery that often ends in tragedy. And when illness strikes, your understanding of medicine is rudimentary at best, often blending observation with a heavy dose of superstition. Imagine waking up with a raging fever, your head pounding, your limbs heavy. There's no quick trip to the doctor, no comforting dose of ibuprofen. Instead, your family gathers around, their faces etched with worry. Your first line of defense might be a local wise woman or herbalist. These individuals, often elderly women with generations of collected knowledge, know the local plants and their properties. They might offer you a bitter brew of willow bark for the fever, a natural source of salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, though they wouldn't know that, or a poultice of herbs for a swollen joint. Their knowledge is practical, empirically gathered over centuries, and sometimes it actually works. But often it doesn't, or it's not enough. Your world is utterly devoid of modern understanding of germs. The concept of bacteria or viruses is centuries away. You breathe in the same air as your livestock, drink from shared wells often contaminated by human and animal waste, and live in close, unhygienic conditions. Simple cuts can fester into deadly infections. A common cold can quickly descend into pneumonia. Childbirth is incredibly dangerous for both mother and child, with high mortality rates. Your life expectancy is shockingly low by modern standards. If you make it past childhood, you're doing well, but reaching old age, say 50 or 60, is a rare privilege. It's a miracle anyone survived to have a midlife crisis. When a serious illness strikes, the lines between medicine and magic blur. If the herbal remedies fail, people turn to other explanations. Was it a curse? An evil spirit? The wrath of God? This is where superstition steps in, an ingrained part of your worldview. You might wear an amulet to ward off evil, recite specific prayers, or make offerings to saints. The local priest might perform an exorcism or offer blessings. People might try bloodletting, believing that bad humors need to be released from the body, a common, though often debilitating, practice. Or they might apply bizarre concoctions like pigeon dung or boiled mouse to a wound, hoping for a miraculous cure, often making things much, much worse. It's like a medieval medical drama, but with more leeches and less understanding of germ theory. A quirky tidbit. Did you know that medieval doctors sometimes prescribed powdered mummy as a cure for various ailments? It was believed to have mystical healing properties, though in reality, it probably just gave you a stomach ache at best, or a new disease at worst. You'd think people would learn. The most terrifying diseases are those that sweep through the population with brutal efficiency, leaving death in their wake. Dysentery, caused by contaminated food and water, is a constant threat, especially during warmer months. It dehydrates victims rapidly, leading to agonizing death. Tuberculosis, a chronic lung disease, slowly wastes away its victims. Smallpox leaves survivors scarred and often blind. And then there are the mysterious sweating sicknesses and fevers that appear seemingly from nowhere, striking down young and old alike. When one of these epidemic diseases hits your village, panic can set in. There's no effective treatment, no quarantine protocols beyond simply avoiding the sick. Those who fall ill are often isolated, feared. The healthy try to protect themselves with desperate measures, burning aromatic herbs, carrying posies of flowers, or simply praying. The death toll can be staggering, wiping out entire families, leaving children orphaned and fields untended. The shared grief is immense, but so is the fear of catching whatever took your neighbor. Historians still argue whether the medieval period was one of consistent poor health or if there were cycles of relatively better health punctuated by severe epidemics. While it's clear that overall health was far below modern standards, some argue that outside of major plague years, life might not have been a constant state of debilitating illness for everyone. Nevertheless, the threat of disease was ever present, a silent killer stalking every household. The environment you live in contributes significantly to the spread of disease. Your hut, shared with animals, offers little ventilation. The lack of proper sanitation means human and animal waste often pollutes the ground and water sources. Fleas and rats, carrying diseases, are common inhabitants of your home and village. Imagine trying to keep clean when water is a precious commodity, fetched bucket by bucket from a well, heated painstakingly over a fire, and shared for multiple purposes. The very conditions of your existence make you profoundly vulnerable. It's a bit like living in a giant petri dish, but you're too busy trying to survive to notice the microscopic horrors multiplying around you. When someone falls gravely ill, the final recourse is often the church. Last rites are administered, prayers are offered for the soul, and preparations are made for burial. Death is a constant companion, an accepted part of life. Funerals are simple affairs, often taking place quickly to prevent the spread of disease, the deceased buried in the local churchyard. The rituals are a comfort, providing a sense of order and spiritual hope in the face of inexplicable suffering. Your body, battered by hard labor and meager food, is also highly susceptible to injury. A broken bone, a deep cut from a farming implement, or a simple fall can lead to lifelong disability or death if infection sets in. There are no X-rays, no surgical procedures, no antibiotics. You either heal naturally or you don't. A serious injury can make you unable to work, rendering you a burden on your family and community. A terrifying prospect in a society where every pair of hands is needed. This constant vulnerability to disease and injury creates a fatalistic outlook. You learn to accept suffering as part of God's will or the natural order of things. There's little expectation of a long, healthy life. Instead, your focus is on enduring, on surviving each day, and hoping that the invisible threats pass you by. The sheer grit and resilience of medieval peasants in the face of such overwhelming health challenges is truly remarkable. They didn't have the luxury of medical science, but they possessed an incredible capacity for endurance, a quiet courage in the face of ever-present sickness and the omnipresent threat of death. You're in the middle of a particularly grueling day, perhaps hauling a heavy load of firewood from the common land, or tirelessly scything a field under a relentless sun. The usual rhythm of your medieval peasant life is a familiar, if exhausting, drumbeat. But then whispers start to trickle into your village. At first, they're vague, unsettling tales from distant market towns, carried by the rare merchant or returning pilgrim. A terrible sickness, they say, striking down folks in Venice, in Genoa. You hear of port cities far away, where the dead pile up in the streets faster than they can be buried. These are just rumors, of course. Your village is isolated, safe, or so you tell yourself. Then the whispers get closer. A neighboring village, just a day's walk away, reports that entire families have vanished. Travelers on the road look haggard, their eyes wide with fear, some bearing strange, dark swellings on their bodies. Your heart tightens with an icy dread. This isn't just another fever. This is something else, something terrifyingly potent. This is when the Black Death arrives. It comes inexorably, carried by the fleas on rats, hitching rides on trade ships, then on carts, then simply walking into your quiet, unsuspecting community. One day, a neighbor develops a fever, a racking cough. You might think it's just the usual winter chill or a bad case of the ague. But then you see them, the telltale buboes, swollen, tender lymph nodes in the groin, armpit, or neck, often turning black. This is where the name Black Death comes from, a grim descriptor for the purplish-black spots that often appear on the skin, a sign of internal hemorrhaging. The speed with which it strikes is horrifying. Someone healthy in the morning can be dead by nightfall. The symptoms are brutal: fever, chills, vomiting, diarrhea, agonizing pain, and then the buboes. And for many, it's not long before they succumb. You watch, helpless, as your family, your friends, your neighbors fall ill. The priest, who once offered solace, is now overwhelmed, performing last rites constantly, sometimes falling sick himself. The familiar routines of the village crumble under the weight of sheer terror and death. There's no understanding of germ theory, remember. People grasp at explanations. God's wrath, planetary alignment, poisoned air, miasma, even witchcraft. Panic spreads faster than the disease itself. Some people flee, hoping to outrun the plague, but often carrying it with them, unwittingly spreading it to new areas. Others lock themselves in their homes, trying to isolate themselves, though this rarely works. There's no escaping the unseen enemy. It's like a medieval horror movie playing out in real time, only you're not watching, you're living it. The initial impact is chaos. The sheer number of sick and dying is overwhelming. There aren't enough healthy people to tend to the sick, to dig graves, to dispose of the bodies. The dead are often left where they fall, or buried in shallow, mass graves outside the churchyard. Their final rest a hurried, undignified affair. The sweet, sickly smell of death permeates the air, a constant reminder of the plague's merciless grip. Imagine the sheer psychological toll of living in a place where death is so pervasive, so visible, so undeniably close. The economic and social fabric of the village begins to tear. Fields lie untended, as those strong enough to work are either sick, tending to the sick, or simply too terrified to venture out. Animals wander freely, uncared for. The communal spirit, usually so vital for survival, starts to erode under the immense pressure of fear and loss. Neighbors who once helped each other now eye each other with suspicion, wondering who will be next, or who might be bringing the plague. The impact on the church is profound. Priests, monks, and nuns, who often ministered directly to the sick, died in staggering numbers. This created a spiritual vacuum, leaving communities without their traditional source of comfort and guidance. It also led to a crisis of faith for some, as they questioned why God would allow such suffering. Others clung to their faith even more desperately, believing the plague was a divine punishment for sins. Historians still argue whether the Black Death significantly weakened the power of the church in the long run or simply reshaped its role. A quirky tidbit: during the Black Death, some desperate people would actually carry around bags of strong-smelling herbs and flowers, believing that the pleasant scent would ward off the bad air or miasma that they thought caused the disease. It was called a nosegay or posy, and it was a bit like a medieval, very ineffective air freshener. They truly had no clue, but it highlights the desperation for any perceived protection. The mortality rates are staggering, almost unimaginable. In your village, you might see a third, half, or even more of the population perish within a few short months. Entire families are wiped out, leaving empty huts, silent hearths. The familiar faces you've known your entire life simply vanish, one by one. The shock, the grief, the sheer emptiness is overwhelming. You survive, perhaps, but at what cost? You are surrounded by ghosts, by the haunting absence of those you loved. The plague doesn't discriminate. Lord, lady, priest, peasant, all are susceptible. Though the poor often suffer worse due to their living conditions and lack of proper nutrition, the wealthy are not immune. This indiscriminate killing challenges the very hierarchical structure of medieval society, briefly rendering everyone equal in the face of death. For a fleeting, horrifying moment, the social order that has defined your life is utterly irrelevant. As the wave of initial deaths subsides, a terrible silence descends upon the village. The air might be clearer of the stench of death, but it's filled with an eerie quiet. The familiar sounds of daily life are muted, diminished. You look around at the greatly reduced population, the empty homes, the fields choked with weeds, and you realize that your world has been irrevocably altered. This isn't just a bad harvest or a local fever. This is a catastrophic reset, a monumental shift that will ripple through generations. You have survived, but the world you knew is gone forever. The Black Death isn't just a historical event. It's a profound, personal tragedy that will mark you for the rest of your days. You carry the weight of the lost, the echoes of their final cries, and the haunting question: why them and why not you? The silence that descends upon your village after the Black Death's initial, brutal sweep is more profound than any you've ever known. It's not just the absence of noise. It's the crushing weight of absence itself. Half the huts stand empty, their doors ajar, their hearths cold. The fields, once buzzing with the collective effort of dozens, now lie eerily quiet, the ripening crops rotting where they stand. Your eyes scan the faces of the survivors, and you see not just exhaustion, but a deep, profound shock, a numb resignation. This isn't just an event. It's an apocalypse in miniature, and you are left to pick through the shattered pieces of your world. Coping with catastrophe demands an immediate and brutal reckoning with reality. The first, most pressing issue is the dead. The sheer number of bodies, sometimes left unburied for days, poses a horrifying health risk. With so few able-bodied individuals left, the survivors, even those weak from illness, are forced to undertake the grim task of burial. Mass graves are dug, shallow pits where bodies are hastily interred, often without proper rites. A stark departure from the deeply ingrained religious traditions of your life. The living are too few, too overwhelmed, too terrified to do much else. The immediate aftermath is also marked by a desperate search for food and resources. With fewer mouths, there's theoretically more food to go around from the last harvest. But the ability to gather and process it has been crippled. The Lord's granaries might be full, but who will work the fields next year? Who will bring in the diminished harvest? The entire system, built on abundant labor, is fundamentally broken. You might find yourself scavenging in abandoned homes, driven by hunger and necessity, a stark violation of the communal norms that once bound you. The social fabric of the village, usually so tight-knit and supportive, strains under the immense pressure. Grief is universal, but it's often a private, desperate affair, overshadowed by the sheer, practical demands of survival. Trust, once implicit, can be replaced by suspicion. Did that neighbor who survived somehow manage to avoid the plague, or did they possess some secret knowledge? Were they favored by God, or perhaps, in darker moments, did they somehow cause the affliction? These insidious thoughts, fueled by fear and trauma, can fester. One of the most immediate and drastic shifts you witness is the labor shortage. Before the plague, there were simply too many peasants, and lords held immense power due to this surplus of labor. Now, suddenly, the roles are reversed. Land is abundant, but hands to work it are desperately scarce. You, a survivor, find yourself in an unprecedented position of leverage. For the first time in your life, your labor is truly valuable. Lords, desperate to keep their lands productive and generate revenue, suddenly find themselves competing for surviving peasants. This leads to some surprising developments. You might hear rumors of peasants demanding better wages, or even improved living conditions, for their labor. Some lords, facing ruin, might reluctantly agree. Others might try to enforce the old ways, perhaps with even harsher measures, leading to increased tensions. This sudden shift in the balance of power is revolutionary, even if it feels terrifyingly unstable. It's like the medieval equivalent of a job market suddenly swinging massively in the employee's favor, and everyone's a bit bewildered by it. A quirky tidbit. During and immediately after the Black Death, there are records of an increase in flagellant movements across Europe. These were groups of people who would publicly whip themselves in processions, believing that by punishing their own bodies, they could atone for humanity's sins and appease God, thereby stopping the plague. Imagine seeing your neighbors, perhaps even your relatives, engaging in such a desperate public act of self-harm. It highlights the extreme psychological and spiritual impact of the plague. The traditional forms of authority also face challenges. The local lord, once unassailable, might have lost many of his own family or retainers. His power feels less absolute when death has ravaged his own household. The church, too, suffers a massive blow. As mentioned, priests died in huge numbers, leading to a desperate shortage of clergy. In some places, new, less educated priests were quickly ordained to fill the void, sometimes leading to a decline in spiritual leadership. People's faith is tested, and while many cling to it even more fiercely, others question the divine order that allowed such suffering. As the months turn into a year, and the immediate crisis subsides, a period of profound readjustment begins. Land that was once meticulously cultivated lies fallow, reverting to scrub. Entire hamlets might be abandoned. For those who remain, there's a grim determination to rebuild, to adapt. You might find yourself with access to more land than before, perhaps even inheriting strips from deceased neighbors. While this presents an opportunity, it also means more work for fewer people, and the threat of overwork is real. Historians still argue whether the Black Death was the primary catalyst for the decline of feudalism or if it merely accelerated existing trends. While the seeds of change were undoubtedly present, the sheer demographic catastrophe undeniably hastened the shift from a labor-rich economy to a land-rich one, empowering the surviving peasant population in ways unimaginable just a few years prior. For you, personally, the experience is deeply scarring. You have witnessed unimaginable loss, confronted death on a scale that will forever alter your perception of life. You carry the trauma of the plague, the constant memory of those who perished. Yet, you also possess a new kind of resilience, a grim determination forged in the fires of catastrophe. You are a survivor, and that distinction, in the face of such overwhelming odds, changes everything. The world might be broken, but you are still here, and that means there is still a chance to rebuild, perhaps even to build something a little bit better than what was lost. The fear never entirely leaves you, but neither does a newfound appreciation for the simple act of breathing, of simply being alive. The air, once thick with the stench of death and the wails of the dying, now carries a different kind of silence. It's the silence of absence, of empty spaces where bustling lives once thrived. You stand amidst the remnants of your village, surveying a shattered world, and the profound changes wrought by the Black Death are undeniable, reverberating through every aspect of your daily existence. This isn't just about fewer people. It's about a fundamental shift in the very ground beneath your feet. Before the plague, the feudal system was like an unbreakable rock, holding you firmly in your place. Now, that rock has been fractured. The sheer number of deaths, estimated to be between 30% and 50%, and in some areas up to 70% of the total population, meant that the most abundant resource, peasant labor, suddenly became incredibly scarce. This simple demographic shift upended centuries of social order. Imagine a game of musical chairs where half the players vanish. The remaining players suddenly have a lot more chairs to choose from, and they get to demand better terms. For you, a surviving peasant, this translates into unprecedented, if terrifying, opportunities. With so much land now lying fallow due to the lack of labor, lords become desperate. They need people to work their fields, to pay rents, to ensure their own survival. This means, for the first time, you have leverage. You might be able to negotiate for lower rents or for a fixed wage instead of labor services. Some peasants, emboldened by the new reality, even leave their traditional manners to seek better conditions elsewhere, a move that would have been unthinkable and brutally punished just years before. This is the beginning of the end for serfdom in many areas, though it's a long, slow, and often violent process. The lords, initially stunned by the catastrophe, try to maintain the old order. Many issue statutes of laborers, laws designed to fix wages at pre-plague levels and prevent peasants from moving freely. But these laws are incredibly difficult to enforce. How do you force someone to work for a pittance when a neighboring lord is offering better terms? How do you prevent desperate peasants from fleeing? The sheer scale of the disruption makes traditional enforcement mechanisms ineffective. It's like trying to put a dam on a tsunami. The force of change is simply too great. The economy of your world is transformed. With fewer people, agricultural production declines, but paradoxically, the value of labor increases. You might find yourself working on different fields, perhaps even managing more land than your ancestors ever dreamed of. While the immediate aftermath is chaotic, in the long run, surviving peasants often see an improvement in their living standards. They have more food per person, more disposable income, if they earn wages, and sometimes even access to better quality goods. This is not to say life becomes easy, far from it, but the absolute grinding poverty that defined your life before the plague begins to lighten for many. The social hierarchy, while still very much present, also experiences shifts. The traditional tripartite division of society, those who pray, those who fight, and those who work, remains, but the workers are no longer quite so utterly subservient. There's a nascent sense of individual value, born out of the scarcity of labor. You are not just a nameless cog. You are a valuable, irreplaceable pair of hands. This newfound, and often reluctant, respect for peasant labor chips away at the foundations of feudal power. A quirky tidbit. Did you know that after the Black Death, Some lords started offering peasants incentives like shorter working hours or even outright freedom from serfdom just to entice them to stay and work their lands. Imagine your great-grandfather, tied to the soil, never dreaming of such terms, and suddenly you have options. It's a powerful illustration of how desperate the lords became. The emotional and psychological impact of the plague lingers for generations. You carry the trauma of immense loss, a collective grief that permeates your community. There's a widespread feeling of memento mori, a constant reminder of death. Art, literature, and religious practices of the post-plague era often reflect this preoccupation with mortality. People become more aware of the fragility of life, perhaps leading to a greater focus on the afterlife, or conversely, a more intense desire to enjoy what little time they have on Earth. Historians still argue whether the Black Death led to a more pessimistic or a more pragmatic worldview among the surviving population. The traditional village community, while enduring, is fundamentally changed. The bonds of kinship and neighborliness are tested by the losses. New families, perhaps from other, even more devastated areas, might move in, changing the social dynamics. Fields are reallocated. Abandoned lands are brought back into cultivation by new hands. The rhythm of communal life is slowly reestablished, but it's a different beat, a slower, more deliberate one, marked by the echoes of those who are gone. The decline of the manor system, though gradual, is hastened by the plague. Many lords find it more profitable to lease out their land for money rents rather than rely on traditional labor services, which are now unreliable. This shift from labor services to cash rents is a significant step towards a more market-based economy, a precursor to the modern world. You might find yourself paying a fixed sum of money each year for your land, rather than spending days working on the Lord's domain. This gives you greater autonomy over your time and your produce. This period of the late medieval era is therefore one of immense flux and transformation. While you still face hardships, periodic famines, continued disease outbreaks, though none on the scale of the first plague wave, and the ever-present demands of your lord, your bargaining power is undeniably greater. You are no longer quite so easily exploited. The silent terror of the Black Death, while devastating, inadvertently cracked open the rigid structures of your world, creating cracks through which light and a semblance of freedom could begin to shine. Your survival means you are not just a witness to history, but an unwitting agent of its profound, undeniable change. Even after the devastating shadow of the Black Death has passed, leaving behind its profound transformations, your relationship with the local lord remains the most defining characteristic of your existence. This isn't a modern landlord-tenant agreement. It's a deep, historically ingrained system where your entire life, from the cradle to the grave, falls under the umbrella of lord's law, peasant's burden. His authority is nearly absolute within the confines of the manor, and while the plague might have shifted the balance of power slightly in your favor regarding labor, it hasn't erased his fundamental right to rule you. Your lord is not just a landowner. He is the highest authority you will ever directly encounter. He holds the manorial court, a local judicial system that handles virtually all disputes and minor crimes within the village. Imagine your local town hall, police station, and courthouse all rolled into one, presided over by a single, powerful individual or his steward. If your neighbor's pig damages your garden, you bring your complaint to the Lord's court. If you fail to perform your labor services, you are summoned before him. If there's a dispute over land boundaries, it's his judgment that matters. This court is not just about justice. It's about maintaining order, enforcing customs, and crucially, ensuring the Lord's revenues and authority are upheld. The justice dispensed can be swift and, by modern standards, incredibly harsh. Fines are common, often paid in goods or labor. For more serious infractions, corporal punishment, flogging, or the stocks is a real possibility. And while executions for peasants are rare for minor offenses, the power to impose such a penalty hangs heavy over every interaction with the Lord. There's no appeal beyond his judgment, no higher court you can easily access. Your entire legal universe is contained within the boundaries of the manor. It's a bit like living in a strict household where your parent is also the judge, jury, and correctional officer, and there's no way to call child protective services. One of the most significant burdens you carry is the range of feudal dues and taxes. We've talked about the corvée labor, the days you owe working directly on the Lord's domain. Even if you now pay more in cash rents, remnants of labor service might still exist or be reimposed if times get tough for the Lord. Then there are the rents themselves, whether in coin or in kind, a portion of your harvest, animals, or other produce. These payments are non-negotiable and must be delivered, often at specific times of the year like Michaelmas, September 29th, or Lady Day, March 25th. Failure to pay can lead to severe penalties, including eviction, which is a death sentence for a peasant. Beyond these, there are specific fees for almost every significant event in your life. Remember the Harriet, the Lord's claim to your best beast upon your death, or the Merchet, a fee paid to the Lord for permission to marry, particularly if you marry someone from outside the manor? This was to compensate the Lord for the potential loss of your offspring's labor, as your children might then belong to another Lord. It's a stark reminder that even your personal choices, your very lineage, are subject to his economic control. And then, of course, there are the banalities, the mandatory use of the Lord's mill, his bake oven, his wine press, all for a fee. While it sounds unfair, sometimes these services were indeed the only ones available or the most efficient. But the fact that you had to use them and pay for the privilege underscored your dependency. It's like your internet provider also owning the only coffee shop, the only laundromat, and the only path to the outside world. The Lord, in return for these extensive obligations, is supposed to provide protection. This protection comes in several forms: military defense against outside raiders or rival lords, and the maintenance of internal peace within the manor. He also theoretically acts as a steward of the land, overseeing the communal farming, resolving disputes, and ensuring the general well-being, or at least the continued productivity, of his peasants. This reciprocal, if profoundly unequal, relationship is the theoretical backbone of feudalism. However, the reality often falls short of the ideal. A cruel or greedy lord could make your life utterly miserable. He could impose arbitrary fines, demand excessive labor, or deny justice. You have little recourse against such abuses. Your best hope is that your lord is simply pragmatic, preferring a stable, productive manner to one racked by discontent. A good lord, by medieval standards, was one who was fair, who upheld customs, and who didn't push his peasants to the breaking point. A bad lord could literally starve you to death with his demands. Historians still argue whether the relationship between lord and peasant was, at its heart, a contract of mutual benefit, albeit skewed, or simply a system of institutionalized exploitation. Evidence supports both sides, varying significantly by region, time period, and the individual personalities involved. But from your perspective, living it day to day, the burden often outweighed the benefit. A quirky tidbit: in some medieval manorial courts, if a peasant was accused of a crime and their guilt was uncertain, they might undergo trial by ordeal. This could involve picking up a red-hot iron or plunging an arm into boiling water. If the wound healed cleanly after a few days, without infection, a miracle in itself, they were considered innocent as God had intervened. You can imagine how often that worked out well for the accused, particularly in an age without antibiotics. The advent of the Black Death, as we discussed, began to loosen the Lord's iron grip. With a drastic decline in the peasant population, your labor became a valuable commodity. This gave some peasants the ability to negotiate, to demand fixed rents instead of labor services, or to flee to other manors offering better terms. This shift marked the very slow, painful decline of serfdom in many parts of Western Europe, gradually transitioning towards a system of paid labor and cash rents. However, this didn't happen overnight, and many lords fought desperately to maintain their traditional rights, sometimes with brutal force. Despite these emerging changes, for much of the medieval period, the power of the lord was an inescapable reality. He was your judge, your landlord, your military protector, and often your spiritual guide, through his control over the local church and priest. Your life revolved around his demands, his expectations, and his moods. You learned to navigate this complex relationship with a mixture of deference, cunning, and quiet resilience. You understood that ultimately your survival depended on keeping the Lord content enough to allow you to continue to toil on his land under his all-encompassing law. The burden of this reality was heavy, but it was the price of your very existence. You're hunched over your meager meal, listening to the incessant drone of the Lord's bailiff. He's announcing yet another increase in the harvest tax, or perhaps demanding extra days of labor on the Lord's domain, even though you're already exhausted from your own fields. A low murmur ripples through the gathered villagers, a collective sigh of despair and frustration. For generations, this has been your lot. Endless demands, relentless toil, and seemingly no way to push back. But sometimes, just sometimes, the pressure builds, the injustice becomes too much, and tiny sparks of rebellion and resistance ignite, challenging the very foundations of the oppressive authority that holds you in its grip. It's important to understand that outright, large-scale rebellion by peasants was incredibly rare for most of the medieval period. Why? Because the odds were overwhelmingly stacked against you. The Lord had armed knights, trained soldiers, and the full backing of the legal system, his own court, backed by the king's power. You had pitchforks, scythes, and desperation. It was a mismatch of epic proportions. So, most resistance was subtle, an undercurrent rather than an open revolt. This everyday resistance took many forms. It could be working slowly when on the Lord's land, feigning illness, or pretending not to understand instructions. It could be poaching small game or gathering extra firewood from the Lord's forests, just enough to supplement your meager diet without drawing too much attention. It could be hiding a portion of your harvest from the Lord's assessors, a dangerous but tempting act of defiance. These small, individual acts of subversion chipped away at the Lord's profits and authority, 1,000 tiny cuts rather than one fatal blow. Imagine a collective, silent slowdown at a factory, but instead of losing your job, you might lose your ear. Sometimes, resistance took the form of legal challenges, if such a thing was even possible. If a lord tried to impose a new, unprecedented tax or service that violated established custom, a brave or foolhardy peasant might try to argue their case in the lord's own court, citing ancient customs and traditions. This was risky and rarely successful, but it highlights that even within the confines of feudal law, there was a sense of what was right and wrong, according to generations of practice. The Black Death, as we discussed, was a game-changer. The drastic decline in population gave surviving peasants unprecedented leverage. The sudden scarcity of labor meant that your services were in demand. This new economic reality fueled a new, bolder kind of resistance. When lords tried to enforce pre-plague wages and labor services through things like the Statute of Laborers, peasants simply refused. They fled their manors, seeking better conditions elsewhere, abandoning their traditional obligations. This wasn't organized rebellion, but a massive, collective act of noncompliance, a foot-voting protest on a grand scale. And then, occasionally, the sparks would ignite into full-blown conflagrations. You've heard the whispers, seen the fear in the Lord's eyes, about events like the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England, or the Jacquerie in France in 1358. These were not just local disturbances. They were massive uprisings involving tens of thousands of peasants, fueled by deep-seated grievances. Excessive taxes, like the poll tax in England, oppressive labor services, and a general sense of injustice and exploitation. Imagine the sheer audacity, the desperate courage it would take to stand up against armed knights, against the very system that has kept you down for centuries. You'd see charismatic leaders emerge, perhaps a former soldier like Wat Tyler or a radical preacher like John Ball, who preached messages of social equality and justice. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? Ball famously asked, challenging the very notion of inherited nobility. These words would echo through the muddy fields, igniting a dangerous hope in the hearts of the downtrodden. It's like a medieval protest rally, but the stakes are literally life or death, and the riot police are wearing full-plate armor. When such a rebellion erupted, it was terrifyingly violent. Peasants would attack manor houses, burning records of their feudal obligations, targeting tax collectors, lawyers, and sometimes even local gentry and clergy who were seen as symbols of oppression. The pent-up rage of centuries of exploitation would burst forth in a brutal, chaotic torrent. But these movements, despite their initial successes, the Peasants' Revolt even briefly occupied London, were ultimately suppressed with extreme brutality. The king's forces, once mobilized, were too powerful. Leaders were captured and executed, and thousands of peasants were slaughtered as a terrifying example to deter future uprisings. A quirky tidbit: during the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381, one of the rebels' key demands was the abolition of all serfdom and the reduction of rents to a mere 4 pence per acre. Imagine the sheer audacity of these uneducated peasants demanding such radical changes from the king himself. It shows a remarkable grasp of their own economic plight and a desire for fundamental social restructuring. Historians still argue whether these medieval peasant rebellions were primarily driven by economic hardship and the desire for better living conditions, or by a more profound ideological yearning for social justice and equality, perhaps influenced by religious teachings. It's likely both, a volatile mix of desperation and nascent ideas of fairness. The suppression of these revolts was brutal, but they weren't entirely in vain. The sheer terror they instilled in the ruling class often led to a grudging reevaluation of policies. Lords might become slightly more lenient, taxes might be lowered, or the process of commuting labor services to cash rents might accelerate. The memory of these uprisings, even if they failed, served as a powerful deterrent against extreme oppression. The lords now knew that there was a breaking point, a limit to how much their peasants could endure. For you, witnessing or participating in such acts of rebellion would be a defining, traumatic experience. The initial surge of hope, the heady feeling of collective power, quickly replaced by the horrifying reality of repression. You'd carry the scars, both physical and psychological, of such a desperate gamble. But even in defeat, these acts of resistance chipped away at the seemingly invincible edifice of feudalism, paving the way, however slowly, for a different future. You might not have seen it in your lifetime, but your desperate struggles, your quiet acts of defiance, and the rare, explosive moments of rebellion all contributed to the long, arduous march towards greater freedom and dignity for those who toiled the land. The persistent rumbling in your stomach is a soundtrack to your life. From the moment you wake until you finally collapse onto your straw pallet, the thought of food, or the lack thereof, is never far from your mind. Your medieval peasant diet is a testament to the harsh realities of survival. Simple, seasonal, and often insufficient. This isn't about culinary delight or nutritional balance. It's about sheer caloric intake, enough to fuel the back-breaking labor that defines your days. It's all about food, glorious food or lack thereof, a concept that oscillates between a fleeting dream and a grim reality. Your primary sustenance is grain. Forget exotic spices or imported delicacies. For you, grain is life. Rye, barley, and oats form the bulk of your diet, with wheat being a rarer, more prized commodity, often reserved for the lord or for special occasions. This grain is ground into coarse flour, sometimes riddled with bits of grit or wheat seeds, and baked into the ubiquitous dark bread. This bread is dense, heavy, and provides the fundamental carbohydrates needed to power your body. You eat it with every meal, often as your only meal. Imagine eating a thick, heavy slice of brown bread for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, day in and day out. It's effective but hardly exciting. Beyond bread, pottage or gruel is a common, versatile dish. This is a thick, soupy porridge made by boiling grains or legumes like peas and beans in water, perhaps with a few herbs or root vegetables if available. It's simple, easy to make in a single pot over an open fire, and provides a warm, if uninspiring, meal. For flavor, you might rely on wild herbs gathered from the common, like nettles, wild garlic, or sorrel. Salt is a precious commodity, often too expensive for everyday use, further limiting the taste of your food. Vegetables come from your small garden plot. Onions, cabbages, leeks, parsnips, and various root vegetables. These provide essential vitamins, but their availability is seasonal. In winter, you rely on stored, dried, or root vegetables that can keep for months. Legumes like peas and beans are vital protein sources, and they have the added benefit of being storable, providing sustenance through the lean winter months. They are a true lifesaver. Meat, as we've touched on, is a rare treat. It's not a daily or even weekly staple. Pigs might be slaughtered once a year, providing a brief period of feasting before the meat is salted or smoked for preservation. Chickens are primarily kept for their eggs, which are a valuable source of protein without sacrificing the animal. If you live near a river, some fish might supplement your diet, but again, often fishing rights are reserved for the Lord. Poaching on the Lord's land is a constant temptation, but the penalties are severe, a grim reminder of whose resources truly belong to whom. Dairy products like milk, cheese, and butter, made from the milk of your goat or cow, if you're lucky enough to have one, add vital fats and proteins. However, medieval cows produced far less milk than modern breeds, and keeping them fed through the winter was a significant challenge. So dairy was precious. Fruits are strictly seasonal. Wild berries, apples, pears, and plums are gathered when ripe and eaten fresh, or crudely dried for a brief extension of their shelf life. There's no refrigeration, no complex preserving techniques beyond salting, smoking, or drying. This means your diet is intrinsically tied to the rhythm of the harvest and the changing seasons. The concept of eating strawberries in winter would be utterly baffling to you. The constant threat of famine means that every meal, every bite, is consumed with a deep awareness of its value. There's no waste. Scraps are given to animals or carefully stored. Leftovers are unheard of. Everything is eaten. Your meals are functional, designed solely to provide energy for work. Eating is not a pleasure, but a necessity. A quirky tidbit. Did you know that medieval peasants often chewed on garlic and onions throughout the day? Not just for flavor, but as a rudimentary form of antiseptic and to ward off illness? Imagine the breath in a medieval village meeting. It speaks to the practical, sometimes desperate health measures people took. Despite the monotonous nature, there's a strong emphasis on community during mealtimes, particularly at supper. Families gather around the hearth, the flickering fire providing the only light. Conversation is sparse, often born of exhaustion, but the shared act of eating reinforces family bonds. On feast days, the entire village might gather for a rare, celebratory meal, perhaps with a small amount of roasted meat or a richer stew, accompanied by communal ale. These are the rare moments of culinary luxury, when the burden of hunger lifts, however briefly. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant diets, despite their simplicity, were nutritionally adequate when food was plentiful. While they certainly lacked variety and often protein, some argue that the sheer volume of high-fiber grains and legumes, combined with hard physical labor, meant that many peasants were adequately nourished during good harvest years. However, this adequacy was always precarious, constantly threatened by crop failure and the lean months. The reality is that your diet is often barely sufficient. You frequently experience periods of hunger and malnutrition, particularly in the lean months of late winter and early spring. Children and the elderly are especially vulnerable, and the effects of long-term poor nutrition are visible in the population. Stunted growth, weakened immune systems, and chronic fatigue. The physical demands of your labor, coupled with a meager diet, mean your body is constantly working at its limits, leaving you susceptible to disease. So, while the idea of food, glorious food, might conjure images of grand banquets for us, for you, a medieval peasant, it simply means enough to survive. It means the satisfying heft of a chunk of bread in your hand, the comforting warmth of pottage in your belly, and the desperate hope that next year's harvest will be just as good, or perhaps even better. Your life is a constant negotiation with hunger, and every meal is a small, hard-won victory. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long, purple shadows across the fields, you finally turn your weary footsteps towards the most intimate part of your world. Your home is where the hearth is. It's not just a dwelling. It's your sanctuary, your refuge from the elements, and the heart of your family's existence. But forget any notions of privacy or spacious comfort. Your medieval peasant home is a lesson in practicality, resourcefulness, and incredibly close quarters. Imagine stepping into a single, often windowless, room. The air immediately envelopes you with the earthy scent of smoke, damp straw, and the subtle, ever-present odor of humanity and livestock. The walls are typically wattle and daub, a framework of woven branches plastered with a mixture of clay, mud, straw, and animal dung. The roof, low and steeply pitched, is thatched with straw or reeds, providing surprisingly good insulation, though it's a constant battle against leaks and infestations. The floor is simply packed earth, uneven and often damp. There's no separate kitchen, no bedrooms, no living room. This one space serves every purpose. At the very center of this room, or perhaps slightly to one side, is the hearth. This isn't a fancy stone fireplace with a chimney. It's usually just a shallow pit dug into the earth floor, or a raised stone platform. A small fire, constantly tended, burns here. This fire is the absolute core of your home. It provides warmth in the bone-chilling cold of winter, a place to cook your meager meals, and the only source of light after dusk. The smoke from the fire often escapes through a simple hole in the roof, or sometimes just filters through the thatch, filling the interior with a perpetual haze. While it makes your eyes water and coats everything in soot, the smoke also acts as a crude disinfectant and helps preserve the thatch from rot. It's a very organic, integrated system. Around the hearth, your entire family gathers. Your wife, your children, perhaps an aging parent or two. There might even be some livestock sharing your dwelling, particularly during the harsh winter months. A few chickens might roost in the rafters, a goat might huddle near the warmth of the fire, or a young calf might be brought inside to protect it from the cold and predators. While this might sound utterly bizarre to modern sensibilities, sharing your bedroom with farm animals, it's incredibly practical for warmth, security, and animal husbandry. Just try not to trip over the pig on your way to bed. Furnishings are sparse, functional, and handmade. You wouldn't find a comfy armchair or a decorative rug here. Your bed is usually a simple wooden frame, or just a pile of straw and rags laid directly on the floor. You share this communal sleeping space with your family, huddled together for warmth. A rough-hewn wooden chest might serve for storing your few precious possessions. Some spare clothing, a small amount of food, perhaps a few religious trinkets. A simple wooden table and a few stools might complete the picture. Everything is built to last, to be repaired repeatedly, and to serve a clear, practical purpose. Aesthetics are a luxury you cannot afford. The lack of windows or very small, unglazed openings means your hut is dark, even during the day. This keeps out the cold in winter, but it also makes interior tasks difficult. You rely on the flickering light of the hearth fire, or perhaps a rushlight, a dried rush dipped in animal fat, for illumination. Imagine trying to mend clothing or prepare food in near darkness. The only light source a smoky, dancing flame. It's an atmosphere of perpetual twilight within your home. Privacy, as we understand it, is a foreign concept. You live in incredibly close proximity to your family, your neighbors, and even your animals. Every sound, every movement, every personal detail is shared. There are no individual bedrooms, no separate spaces for quiet reflection. This constant communal living fosters strong family bonds and interdependence, but it also means there's little escape from the petty squabbles, the personal habits, and the emotional lives of everyone around you. It's like living in a perpetual family camping trip, but without the option of going home. A quirky tidbit. In some medieval peasant homes, the smoke from the central hearth was deliberately allowed to blacken the underside of the thatch roof. This thick layer of soot not only helped to preserve the thatch from rot and insects, but it also served as a crude form of insulation and, somewhat grimly, could be scraped off and used as a fertilizer. Talk about multi-purpose. Maintaining your home is a constant chore. The packed earth floor needs to be swept, the thatch roof needs regular repairs to prevent leaks, and the wattle and daub walls need patching. Firewood, gathered from the common land, is essential and requires constant effort to procure. Keeping your hut warm and dry, even with basic methods, is a significant part of your daily routine, especially during the colder months when survival literally depends on it. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant huts were truly as rudimentary and squalid as some sources suggest, or if they offered more comfort and space than often portrayed. While clearly not luxurious, there's evidence that even simple huts were carefully constructed and adapted to local conditions, often providing adequate shelter and warmth given the resources available. However, the lack of sanitation and ventilation undoubtedly contributed to health problems. Your home is more than just a shelter. It's also your family's most significant asset, passed down through generations. It represents stability, continuity, and your rootedness in the land. When you return to it after a long day in the fields, despite its simplicity and discomforts, there's a profound sense of belonging. It's where your children are born, where you share your meager meals, where you grieve your losses, and where you find what little rest is possible. It might not be a castle, or even a modest cottage by modern standards, but in your medieval world, your hearth is truly your home, the very core of your enduring, hard-won existence. After the relentless, back-breaking toil in the fields, the gnawing hunger, and the omnipresent threat of disease, there are still pillars that uphold your spirit, anchors in the tumultuous sea of medieval peasant life. These are the deeply intertwined forces of family, faith, and festivities, providing structure, solace, and the rare, precious moments of joy that make your arduous existence bearable. They are the true riches of your impoverished world. Your family is not just a collection of individuals. It is your fundamental unit of survival. You are born into it, you work alongside it, and you will likely die surrounded by it. There's no concept of independent living. Your very existence is dependent on your parents, your siblings, and later, your spouse and children. Every member, from the youngest child capable of gathering sticks to the oldest grandparent who can mend a net, contributes to the household economy. Your family is your workforce, your support system, your social security. The medieval peasant family is typically nuclear, meaning parents and their children, but often extended to include aging grandparents, unmarried aunts or uncles, or even distant relatives who have nowhere else to go. Everyone lives in that single-room hut, sharing space, warmth, and the constant challenges of daily life. Marriage is not primarily about romantic love, but about practicality and economic necessity. It's about combining labor, land, if any, and ensuring the continuation of the family line to work the land and provide for old age. Children are seen as future labor, a blessing, and a guarantee for support when you are no longer able to work. Within the family unit, roles are clearly defined by gender and age. Men typically perform the heavy fieldwork, plowing, sowing, harvesting. Women manage the household, preparing food, making and mending clothes, raising children, tending the garden plot, and often assisting in the fields during peak seasons. Children, from a young age, learn these roles, mimicking their elders and gradually taking on more responsibilities. There is little concept of childhood as a time purely for play or education. It's a period of apprenticeship for the relentless demands of adult life. Beyond the family, faith is the bedrock of your world. The Church, specifically the Roman Catholic Church, is an omnipresent force, shaping your worldview, your morality, and the rhythm of your year. The local parish church, often the most impressive building in your village, is the heart of your community. You attend Mass every Sunday, listening to sermons in Latin, which you likely don't understand, but the priest might explain key points in the vernacular, participating in rituals and seeking spiritual comfort. The priest, usually from a peasant background himself, is a central figure. He baptizes your children, marries you, offers solace in times of sickness and death, and provides the last rites that ensure your soul's passage to the afterlife. For a people living in harsh conditions with little scientific understanding, faith provides answers to the unanswerable, a sense of meaning in suffering, and the promise of eternal salvation, a glorious respite from earthly toil. You contribute your tithes, 1/10 of your produce, to the Church, a significant burden but also an act of piety, securing your spiritual well-being. The rhythm of your year is marked by religious festivals and saints' days. These are not just spiritual observances. They are vital social occasions, breaks from the relentless toil, and opportunities for communal celebration. Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, and the feast days of local saints are eagerly anticipated. On these days, work in the fields often ceases. You might attend special church services, participate in processions, and then gather for rare festivities. These festivities are simple but deeply joyous. They might involve communal feasting, where the meager resources of the village are pooled to create a more substantial meal, perhaps with a rare taste of meat or a richer ale. There's music, often simple pipes and drums, and dancing, communal folk dances that everyone knows. Storytelling is central, with old legends, ballads, and local gossip shared around a roaring fire. These are moments of profound human connection, of laughter and camaraderie, where the burdens of daily life are temporarily forgotten. It's like a medieval version of a block party, but with a lot more mud and a lot less electricity. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant religiosity was primarily born out of genuine spiritual conviction or from a pragmatic need for social order and hope in a brutal world. It's likely both. A deep, inherited faith blended with the practical comfort and structure that the church provided. Beyond the major festivals, there are smaller, localized traditions, perhaps a harvest festival to give thanks for a good crop, or a spring ritual to bless the fields. These blend Christian observances with older, pre-Christian folk customs, a rich tapestry of belief and practice rooted in the land. Superstitions abound, beliefs about fairies, spirits, and the power of charms, often coexisting with official church doctrine. You might say a prayer to the Virgin Mary for a sick child, and then secretly hang a protective charm above their bed, just to be safe. It's a pragmatic approach to a mysterious world. The sense of community that emerges from these shared family bonds, collective faith, and communal festivities is incredibly strong. You know everyone in your village, often for generations. You share triumphs and tragedies. When a new child is born, the village celebrates. When someone dies, the village mourns. This collective identity, this deep sense of belonging, is a powerful antidote to the isolation and hardship of your life. It ensures that even in the face of famine or plague, you are not alone. It's a fundamental strength that allowed medieval peasant communities to endure centuries of hardship, a quiet testament to the enduring power of human connection. Your hands, gnarled and calloused, are the most important tools you possess. They are capable of amazing feats of endurance, capable of coaxing life from the stubborn earth. But even the most resilient hands need assistance. In your medieval world, tools, trades, and ingenuity aren't about sleek machinery or mass production. They're about practical, often rudimentary implements, passed down through generations, and the cleverness to make the most of what little you have. This isn't about innovation for profit, but innovation for survival. Imagine your entire technological arsenal consisting of little more than wood, iron, and a few basic principles of mechanics. The most fundamental tool in your life is the plow. For centuries, this was often a simple wooden scratch plow, pulled by oxen, that merely scratched a shallow furrow in the soil. Over time, improvements were made, such as the heavy, wheeled plow with an iron share, the part that cuts the earth, and a moldboard which turns the soil over, allowing for deeper cultivation and better aeration. This seemingly simple invention was revolutionary, literally transforming the productivity of medieval agriculture. You might not understand the physics behind it, but you understand that it means more food. Your scythe, with its long, curving blade, is essential for harvesting grain and hay. It requires immense skill and strength to wield effectively, a sweeping motion that cuts swathes of crops. For smaller tasks, a sickle, a smaller, handheld curved knife is used. For digging, you have a simple hoe or a spade, often with a wooden blade reinforced with iron. Imagine trying to prepare a large field with just these hand tools day after day, year after year. It's a testament to raw human effort. Beyond the field tools, your daily life requires a myriad of other implements. A wooden bucket for fetching water from the well, meticulously repaired when it leaks. Simple clay pots for cooking over the open fire. A grindstone for sharpening your tools, often shared communally. Perhaps a few simple knives for cutting food and other tasks. Everything is basic, designed to be durable, and reparable by hand. There are no spare parts readily available. If something breaks, you fix it or you make do without. This constant need for repair and creation means that certain trades are absolutely vital within or near your village. The blacksmith is arguably the most indispensable craftsman. He transforms raw iron, a precious commodity, into tools, nails, hinges, and repairs broken metal parts. The clang of his hammer on the anvil is a familiar and comforting sound, signifying a crucial resource for the entire community. You might pay him in grain or provide labor in exchange for his services. It's a direct, barter-based economy. The miller, operating the Lord's mill, processes your grain into flour. The mill, often powered by water or wind, is one of the most complex pieces of machinery in your world, a marvel of medieval engineering. His trade is essential even if you resent the fee you have to pay for his services. There might also be a village carpenter, skilled in working wood to build and repair huts, carts, and simple furniture. A weaver might turn your flax or wool into cloth. These specialized tradesmen are the medieval equivalent of modern technicians, essential for keeping the basic infrastructure of your life functioning. Ingenuity is born out of necessity. With limited resources, you learn to be incredibly resourceful. Every scrap of material is valuable. Old clothes are mended and remended until they're rags, then perhaps used for patching or cleaning. Animal bones might be fashioned into rudimentary tools or implements. Leftover animal hides are tanned, a smelly, unpleasant process, to make leather for shoes or straps. Nothing is wasted. This is the ultimate recycling program, driven not by environmental consciousness, but by the desperate need to survive. A quirky tidbit. Did you know that medieval peasant homes sometimes had a special niche built into the wall near the hearth called a bee bowl? This was a small, sheltered recess where a skep, a traditional beehive made of straw, could be placed. It kept the bees warm and protected in winter, allowing peasants to harvest honey for sweetness and beeswax for candles or waterproofing. It's a clever example of integrating natural resources into home design. The pace of technological change in your world is incredibly slow. Innovations, when they occur, spread by word of mouth and demonstration, taking decades or even centuries to become widespread. The knowledge of how to build and use these tools is passed down orally, from father to son, mother to daughter. This tradition ensures that vital skills are never lost, but it also means that new ideas are adopted very cautiously. Why risk a new method when the old one, however inefficient, has at least ensured survival for generations? Historians still argue whether medieval agricultural technology was inherently stagnant or if it saw significant, albeit slow, advancements driven by necessity and regional adaptation. While the broad strokes of peasant life remain similar for centuries, subtle improvements in plowing techniques, crop rotation, like the three-field system, and tool design did occur, gradually increasing productivity over time. Your tools are often family heirlooms, passed down through generations, each scratch and dent a testament to the hands that have wielded them before you. They are not merely objects. They are extensions of your body, crucial partners in your endless struggle with the earth. The well-maintained hoe, the sharp scythe, the sturdy bucket, these are the silent heroes of your daily grind. In a world without factories, without mass production, and with very limited access to trade beyond the local market, the skills of the individual craftsman and the ingenuity of the peasant themselves are paramount. You are a jack of all trades, a master of none, but capable of turning your hand to almost any practical task. From mending a broken fence to sharpening a knife, from patching your roof to weaving a simple cloth, your very survival depends on your ability to work with your hands, to understand the basic properties of materials, and to adapt to whatever challenges the world throws at you. This deep connection to your tools and the trades that support them is a fundamental part of your identity as a medieval peasant, a testament to a life built on pure, unadulterated resourcefulness. Your world is small, confined primarily to the boundaries of your village and the fields surrounding it. The horizon, marked by a distant line of trees or a low hill, represents the very edge of your known universe. Yet, even for a medieval peasant, there are fleeting glimpses of the road less traveled, tantalizing hints that a much larger, more diverse, and often dangerous world exists beyond your familiar patch of mud and toil. These glimpses are rare, but they ignite a flicker of curiosity, a sense of something beyond the daily grind. The most common and often only encounter you have with the outside world comes through the market town. Perhaps once a month or a few times a year, your lord might grant permission or, more likely, demand that you go to attend a market in a nearby, slightly larger settlement. This journey, usually a half-day's walk, is an event in itself. The roads are not paved, often little more than muddy tracks, deeply rutted by carts and churned by livestock. You might travel in a small group for safety, wary of bandits or stray wild animals. Arriving at the market town is a sensory explosion. The air, usually filled with the familiar smells of your village, wood smoke, damp earth, animals is now thick with the scent of diverse goods. Spices from distant lands, cured meats, fresh fish, tanned leather, the sweet tang of brewed ale. The sounds are a cacophony of shouting merchants, haggling customers, the lowing of livestock, and the babble of different dialects. It's a riot of color, with merchants displaying their wares, and people dressed in slightly finer clothes than you're accustomed to. Here, you might sell a small surplus of your own produce or a few eggs, a hand-woven basket, some wool, to acquire something you cannot make yourself. Perhaps a piece of better quality iron for a tool, a length of finer cloth for a rare new garment, or some salt to preserve meat. You might see traveling merchants, their carts laden with goods from far-off cities, hear snippets of their stories, tales of places you can barely imagine. This market day is a brief, exhilarating escape from the monotony of your village, a reminder that the world is indeed bigger, even if it remains largely inaccessible. Beyond the market, another source of outside contact comes from travelers. Pilgrims, identifiable by their staff and scrip, might pass through your village on their way to a distant shrine. They bring news, gossip, and sometimes even miraculous stories from places like Canterbury, Rome, or even Jerusalem. Their tales are often exaggerated, but they offer a tantalizing glimpse of a world beyond your manor. You might offer them a humble meal or a place to rest by your hearth, eager for their stories in return. Soldiers are another, often less welcome, presence. They might be the Lord's retainers, passing through on their way to battle, or perhaps a larger royal army on campaign. Their presence is intimidating, their demands for food and lodging often heavy. While they represent the power of the larger world, they also represent its dangers, the threat of war, pillaging, and disruption. You learn to be wary of them, offering what they demand and hoping they move on quickly. Occasionally, a royal messenger or a tax collector might arrive, bringing news or demands from the king's court. These encounters are rare and formal, conducted with immense deference and trepidation. They are a stark reminder that even though you never see the king, his authority, however distant, still reaches down into your village, influencing your life through taxes and laws. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were truly as isolated as traditionally depicted, or if the flow of goods, ideas, and people, however limited, created a more interconnected world than previously thought. While large-scale travel was rare, the cumulative effect of these small interactions likely meant that even remote villages were not entirely cut off. A quirky tidbit: did you know that some medieval peasants would occasionally leave their villages and become itinerant laborers during peak harvest times in other regions? They would travel, often with their families, to areas where labor was scarce and wages were higher, effectively becoming medieval migrant workers. This was a risky venture, but after the Black Death, it became a more viable way to escape crushing poverty and seek better opportunities. Imagine the courage it would take to leave everything you know, walk for days, and hope for work in a strange place. The idea of travel for pleasure is utterly alien to you. Why would anyone willingly leave the security, such as it is, of their home and community to face the dangers of the road, the cost, and the uncertainty? Travel is reserved for necessity, market, pilgrimage, or flight from disaster. The risks far outweigh any potential rewards. The world beyond your village is wild, untamed, and often populated by fearsome beasts, real and imagined. Yet, these occasional encounters, these snippets of information from the outside, feed the village rumor mill, inform the stories told around the evening fire, and perhaps, subtly, widen your own narrow perspective. You might hear of bustling cities with thousands of people, of grand cathedrals whose spires touch the sky, of distant lands where the sun always shines or where exotic animals roam. These tales, however improbable, hint at a world far grander and more complex than your small, mud-walled reality. The road less traveled, for you, is less a path to be journeyed and more a concept, a whisper of possibilities. It underscores your rootedness, your dependence on your familiar patch of land. But it also serves as a reminder that even in your constrained existence, you are part of a larger, evolving world, connected by unseen threads of trade, faith, and the occasional, intrepid traveler. These fleeting glimpses offer a quiet understanding that your small life, while hard, is a piece of something much, much bigger. As the distant memory of plague and famine fades into the collective consciousness, a new kind of rhythm emerges in your village. It's still hard, still demanding, but subtle shifts have occurred. You, the medieval peasant, are no longer just a forgotten statistic in a history book. Your struggles, your quiet acts of defiance, and your sheer, unyielding endurance have left an indelible mark, shaping the world that came after you. This is your enduring legacy, your echoes reverberating through time. Think about it. For centuries, you, the agricultural laborer, formed the vast majority of the population. Everything, from the Lord's castle to the priest's sermon, rested on the food you grew and the labor you provided. You were the foundation, the unsung hero, or perhaps the perpetually burdened anti-hero of the medieval world. Without your backbreaking work, that world simply could not have existed. Your very existence was the engine of an entire civilization. The most direct and profound part of your legacy stems from the demographic catastrophe of the Black Death. Before the plague, labor was abundant and cheap, giving lords immense power. Afterwards, your scarcity became your strength. The slow, grinding decline of serfdom in many parts of Western Europe, the gradual shift from forced labor to paid wages, and the ability for peasants to sometimes negotiate for better terms, these were direct consequences of the demographic shock you lived through. You inadvertently gained leverage, and that leverage slowly but surely chipped away at the feudal system, paving the way for a more mobile, market-based society. It's like being forced into a massive, unwilling strike, and suddenly, because there are so few of you left, your demands are actually heard. Beyond the big, dramatic shifts, your daily life and innovations, however small, left their mark. The agricultural techniques you perfected over centuries, the heavy plow, the three-field system, the understanding of crop rotation and fallow periods, increased productivity and laid the groundwork for future agricultural revolutions. You might not have been a scientist, but your empirical knowledge of the land, passed down orally through generations, was a form of vital, practical science. You learned what to plant where, when to harvest, and how to make the most of every scrap of soil. Your deep connection to the land and the cycle of seasons influenced the very calendar and traditions that would evolve into the modern era. Many of our holidays, even secular ones, have roots in the ancient agricultural festivals you celebrated. Harvest festivals, spring planting rituals, and celebrations tied to the turning of the year. Your rhythms still echo in the subtle patterns of our lives, even if we've forgotten their origins. A quirky tidbit. Did you know that many of the surnames that are common today, like Smith, Miller, Baker, Shepherd, or even Carpenter, are direct echoes of the medieval peasant trades and occupations? It's a literal linguistic fossil of your world, showing how your work defined your identity and passed down through generations. When you meet a tailor, you're meeting someone whose ancestors likely cut and stitched cloth for your kind. Your resilience, your ability to endure unimaginable hardship, is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Famine, plague, oppressive lords, constant toil, you faced it all, day after day, year after year, and yet you persevered. This quiet, unyielding determination, the sheer will to survive and provide for your family, is an inspiring legacy. It reminds us of the incredible capacity of humans to adapt and persist even in the face of overwhelming adversity. You didn't have therapists or support groups, but you had grit, and that was enough. The very concept of common rights, of shared resources like woodland and pasture, which was so vital to your survival, also lingered through later centuries, influencing ideas about communal property and public access. While often eroded by enclosures and changing land ownership, the memory of these shared resources was a powerful one, a subtle pushback against absolute private ownership. Historians still argue whether the cumulative effect of peasant discontent and minor acts of resistance, even outside the major revolts, contributed significantly to the long-term erosion of feudal power. While direct causality is hard to prove, it's clear that the constant pressure from below, the small acts of noncompliance, and the occasional explosion of rebellion certainly played a role in pushing the medieval system towards its eventual transformation. The basic architecture of your life, the simple wattle and daub hut, the use of local materials, the ingenuity of building with what's at hand, These are echoed in vernacular architecture across Europe, influencing later, more sophisticated building techniques. The very layout of many European villages and towns still bears the imprint of their medieval peasant origins, with the church at the center, clustered dwellings, and radiating fields. You walked these paths, and in many ways, the paths still exist, a silent tribute to your daily journeys. Your impact on language is also undeniable. Many common phrases and idioms in modern English and other European languages have their roots in medieval peasant life and agricultural practices. Even when we don't realize it, our words carry the echoes of your struggle. And finally, your existence reminds us of how far humanity has come. When you look around your modern bedroom, with its warm blankets, clean water, plentiful food, and the distant hum of electricity, you are living a life that would be utterly unimaginable to a medieval peasant. Your relative comfort, your freedom of movement, your access to education and healthcare, all of these were built, however indirectly, on the very foundations that you, the medieval peasant, laid down with your sweat, your tears, and your indomitable will to survive. You are the quiet giants upon whose shoulders much of the modern world truly rests. Now, as the embers of our historical journey begin to cool, and the images of muddy fields and flickering hearths gently recede, allow your mind to drift. The sun sets on the distant medieval landscape, and the sounds of the village slowly fade. The weary peasant finds a moment of respite, a deep, restorative sleep after another day of unyielding effort. The cold earth softens beneath them. The sounds of the night settle into a quiet lull. The burdens of their world, for this brief period, lift and dissolve into the peaceful darkness. You, too, can now surrender to that same profound tranquility, knowing that the journey through history has reached its gentle conclusion. Let the stillness embrace you, and find your own quiet peace.